Hi everybody, and welcome to this demonstration on elastic load balancers. So now that we know what elastic load balancers are, let's see how we can configure them within AWS. So the first thing we want to do is navigate to where the load balancers are. So let's say if I want to find elastic load balancers, I will, for example, type elastic load balancer. And as you guys can see, the only option that shows up is an EC2 instance, because if you remember, elastic load balancers are configured within the EC2 dashboard. So I'm going to go ahead and navigate to my EC2 dashboard. And towards the left hand side, if I scroll down a little bit, here's where I can see where the load balancing options are. I'm going to go ahead and click on load balancers. And it will bring me to a dashboard where it will show all of the load balancers that your organization would have. As you guys can see, I don't have any at the moment. So I'm going to go ahead and click on create load balancer. It will take me to another screen, which give me an option to either create an application load balancer, create a network load balancer, or a classic load balancer. Now a classic one is used if you have an existing application that's running on an EC2 instance, which is it's also classified as a previous generation one. A network one will handle your network traffic, or an application one will handle your application. So let's say if we want to create an application load balancer. When I click on that, it'll take me to a screen where I can specify different information for my load balancer. So let's say if I just give my load balancer a name. Next, I have two options, whether an internal facing one or a purely internal one. So an internal facing load balancer, like if you bring your mouse pointer to the eye, it'll give you an information. It's for requests from clients over the internet. And an internal load balancer purely routes requests from clients to targets using private IP addresses. So these options would depend on if you have traffic coming in from the outside or if it's purely an internal network load balancer for you. The IP address, I will leave it as default, which is an IPv4, or you're going to have a dual stack if you want version 4 and version 6. In terms of the listeners, we can specify an HTTP or an HTTPS, or if we click on add listener, we can have both the regular HTTP and the secured HTTP. Towards the bottom is where we can specify what VPC we want this load balancer to reside in. If we have multiple VPCs, that will be showing up here. And here is where we can configure how many availability zones we want the load balancer to span across. And as you guys can see, currently I'm in Northern Virginia. And here's where all the availability zones within the specific regions are. So let's say if I want the load balancer to span across multiple availability zones, 1A and 1B. Here's where we are able to specify security settings. So if I go back one screen, if you guys remember, we can specify both HTTP and HTTPS. If we were to do HTTPS, for example, and if I were to click next, here's where we would specify the certificates. Now I'm going to only do HTTP because I do not have any certificates specified or created within AWS. But if you are an organization that is working on a secured channel, here's where you can specify either a certificate that's managed by AWS, or if you have your own certificates, you can also upload them here. But since I don't have certificates, I'm going to just stick with HTTP. And now when I click on next, again, you guys see I don't have any options to specify certificates. When I click on next, here's where we can specify which security group this ELB will be tagged against. You can either create a new one or select an existing one. So I'll just keep the default one that's there. And here's where we can configure routing. Again, the load balancer routes requests to targets in this target group using the protocol which we specified, which was HTTP. And then it's also going to perform some health checks on the target using the settings that we specify here. There's also additional health settings we can specify in terms of the thresholds, the timeout, the intervals, and so on. So I'm going to just give this a name also. And we can either specify the target type, whether it's an instance, or EC2 instance, whether it's an IP, or whether it's a Lambda function. Now, since I specified Lambda function, we can specify which Lambda function is going to do. And obviously, if you do not have a Lambda function created, you are also able to add one later. So let's say if I were to configure this and add a Lambda function later, I'm going to go ahead and click on review. And it will take me to a basic information to see what all of the information that I have specified for this load balancer. As you guys can see, the name, the ports. I've left all the other things as default. There's no security settings because we're only working with HTTP. Security groups are also default, and then here is the routing information. I'm going to go ahead and click on review. And there we go, our load balancer is successfully created. Now if I were to click on close, here as you guys can see right now, it's currently provisioning my load balancer. And towards the bottom, we can have a overview of the load balancer. We can see where it's listening. We can also view the monitoring to see the traffic and how the load balancer has handled the traffic that's coming in. So it gives a host of information for you to see the traffic that's coming in and that's being handled by your load balancer. And then find the tags if you specify this tag. Let's say if this load balancer is for specific applications, specific departments, and so on. So that's basically a general overview of creating a Elastic load balancer. This specific one was a application load balancer, but the information is primarily very similar if you want to create a network load balancer.